Welcome to Talking Health Tech with Macadamian, where we explore the intersection of technology and healthcare. We've worked with many innovative companies to design and develop digital products that improve people's health, and we want to share all that we can to help people build better products. So let's get to today's episode.
All right, so today on our show, our guest is VP of Customer Solutions here at Macadamian, Timon LeDain. Timon, thank you so much for speaking with me.
My pleasure.
All right, let's get right into it. Today we're going to be talking about some of the biggest barriers we're seeing to innovation in the healthcare space. So on that note, what are some of the biggest barriers?
Probably to start with, it's the regulatory environment. I guess given the complexity of the space and the types of problems being addressed and the potential impacts of the solutions being deployed, I'd say the number one barrier to innovation is the regulatory hurdles that are in place for obvious reasons, patient safety, but that can slow down the pace of innovation. And of course, the regulatory requirements are different across different regions, and we have different types of regulations depending on the products you're bringing out to market, from FDA and CE mark for medical devices to data privacy and security requirements for the storage and management of patient data. And then I've seen also with some entrepreneurs is that maybe are more technology centric, that see the potential for technology to have a positive impact, but aren't necessarily working with the end users of that potential solution. There's sometimes a disconnect between the entrepreneurs coming up with solutions without actually spending enough time with the clinicians that are on the front lines on a day-to-day basis, that have a different understanding of the challenges that are required, so that maybe a tech solution or engineered solution won't in the end address the problem so much as a design-led one.
Right. So I guess, it is fair to say that the healthcare space is a fairly regulated space, and these regulations are different based on geographies. Europe might have its own set of rules versus the US. But is there, how do rules around compliance, could they actually help with innovation?
Definitely. As I mentioned in my last answer, there's good reasons why these regulations have come into place. There's been some horrific incidences of patient harm that occurred because the proper checks and balances weren't put in place in specific systems, and so the errors that occurred as a result of the design and commercialization negatively impacted the patients. And the thalidomide situation was a good example of that, where the medication wasn't properly tested. And there were cases of an X-ray machine not properly being configured, so that the user thought they were giving a specific dose, but the display did not correspond with what the dosage level was set up in the system itself, and so the patients were overdosed with radiation. And so those use cases were what drove the requirements. But I guess on the flip side, if you can achieve those compliance hurdles faster, then you can actually speed up adoption of innovative technologies, because it's a stamp of approval. So if you develop an algorithm that has an FDA stamp of approval on it, the adoption rate is could be accelerated, because there's always already that level of confidence in the maturity of that algorithm and its proven efficacy. Same with being able to get certified to be compliant to one of the data privacy or data security standards. Again, if you have a third-party certification that you're addressing that, you reduce the risk concerns of an early adopter to a point where those new innovations can actually be validated in a clinical setting and be prove themselves to deliver on the promise.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up because people's lives are on the line in the healthcare space, right? So these regulations are needed to keep everyone safe. And then this question sort of touches upon the first one, but for example, the FDA approval is one example, but could these rules be a hindrance to innovation?
Definitely. I mean, the natural course of innovation entails a lot of trial and error. You fail fast and recover quickly, and make pivots as you see what success looks like, or you start to develop product market fit. Um, but you have to balance that with the potential for risk in particular patient risk in those early stages of making those errors. So it is a balance. I think what we've seen through the pandemic is a willingness to change for the greater good. Make adjustments in that risk reward balance. But that has also shown that there have been both positives in terms of the rapid development and deployment of vaccines at an unheard of pace that resulted in some of those adjustments. But we also saw proposals for um, cures that have come and gone, that probably could have used a little more scrutiny up front. So um, and certainly that more time has to be spent in terms of ensuring your data architecture and data management is secure when it comes to early prototypes of digital healthcare solutions, to ensure that the patients that are part of the initial trials, that their privacy is adequately protected.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to that next question is, in the healthcare space, you're trying to balance innovation with patient privacy. Like how do you continue innovating while making sure that patient privacy remains secure?
Yeah, I think some things in the digital health domain are sort of becoming table stakes. So, I think the risk reward measure, or yardstick, line in the sand, is movable depending on the greater good of patients overall. But some things are immovable, and I believe we've seen that patient privacy is one of those immovable ones. And so, and what's nice to see is that the modern cloud platforms that we're now using from Microsoft and Amazon and others sort of have those checks and balances in place already. Um, and we've developed our own platform as a service, Health Connect, that allows you to start a project with those checks and balances and that secure platform available from day one. So we have the tools today that really are available so that we can innovate quickly. On top of that, we can iterate in a way that in no way compromises that data privacy and patient privacy. So I think we've solved some of those challenges of how to innovate in this space, so that you don't have to make any compromises.
Yeah, and in regards to regulations, there's one called HIPAA, and Macadamian recently became HIPAA certified. What exactly is HIPAA?
The term stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And it applies to covered entities in the United States. So this is traditionally and typically hospitals and health insurance companies. It's to ensure that as a patient, your health records can move with you. So if you move from Florida to California, for instance, that your records will transition with you, and that those records won't be abused. So if you go into as a woman and to deliver a baby, the fact that you went into the hospital to for the birth of your child won't result in you being pitched diaper products from various companies, right? So the terms of use for that data, and the onus of protection of those records, and the measures put in place by these parties to ensure that your records are kept safe are all covered under that requirement. And as partners, or as solution providers to these covered entities, there's a lot of value in being certified to those standards, because it sets the same level of due diligence and compliance over those data records across all parties, both the covered entities and the third parties that support them.
Right, and then across the pond, there's another regulation. It's called the GDPR. Describe that a little bit.
Sure. So it stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it's traditionally associated with EU residents. So some people might erroneously think, okay, well, if I'm not a European company, I don't have to worry about GDPR. But in fact, it covers data for EU residents. But if you are a company in Canada or the US, you still fall under those regulations if an EU resident has any personal data on one of your systems. And so it's a little more all-encompassing. There are definitely some measures that are similar to HIPAA relating to disclosure of how you will use their personal data upfront, and a need to obtain consent upfront on allowing them to give you access to that data. But it also includes some unique elements as well, such as the right to be forgotten, where a EU resident can inquire about what data you have about them, and correct any errors in that data if there are. But more importantly, ask you to delete all records that you have on them, which you have to comply to.
That's interesting. That's good to know. And especially if you are a North American business looking to expand into the European market, it's important to understand GDPR. I wanted to sort of end off on talking about COVID-19 and this pandemic that we're still kind of in. How has it sped up innovation in healthcare?
I think one of the things it's done is it's forced organizations across the world to remove barriers where those barriers are an impediment to accelerating innovation that is critical to get us past the pandemic. And the reimbursement models around telehealth is a good example of that, where they weren't necessarily regulatory barriers, but they were barriers to adoption, where if you provided clinical advice over a phone or a video conference as a clinician or a specialist, you couldn't get paid for it, right? So that barrier quickly dropped. The lockdown on the sharing of data, it became quickly clear that sharing information on the different variants and collaborating on all of the data that was being captured in various research centers around the world, including Johns Hopkins, and making that data readily available to everyone working on a solution was a barrier that was dropped, because we didn't mention it earlier, but if you're building machine learning algorithms or new AI-based solutions for healthcare, one of the biggest barriers to innovation there is access to training data, and so that was one barrier that was dropped or addressed early on in the pandemic, so that we could all benefit from all of this data being collected to be able to deliver a vaccine in literally record time. And we're seeing that in the appreciation and for the value of telehealth, where we traditionally only use it for serving remote communities. We're now seeing there's many benefits even in urban centers to deliver care in a through technology in a more efficient or cost-effective way. And so I think the risk-reward equation became very clear through the pandemic, and as a result, organizations kind of aligned themselves towards finding a common solution. And so I think it set us up well post-pandemic to realize that there is flexibility in terms of revisiting some of these barriers in ways that can actually accelerate advances in the healthcare space that benefit clinicians, patients, and the general well-being of our citizens.
Timon LeDain is the VP of Customer Solutions here at Macadamian. Timon, thank you so much for speaking with me in regards to this fascinating topic.
My pleasure, Alan.